Welcome back. A few videos ago we talked about variables and how you can store values, like numbers or strings. But sometimes you'll want to store many variables at once. For example, if you're storing a leaderboard, you want a collection of everyone's scores. The naive approach of doing this would be to just create a variable for every single score. That might look something like this. But you can see that this will get very long very fast. And it becomes harder to update this collection of variables over time once you start adding more scores. So the solution to that is called an array. An array is stored in a variable just like anything else. But instead of typing in a value like a string or a number, you type in square brackets. This is an empty array, and I'll add the same scores to it from before. And now this array has numbers in it. And just like any other variable, arrays also have data types. The data type here is called array, but we get an error, and that's because we also need to define the type of the values inside of the array. In this case, they are whole numbers, they are ints. To define that, go to the end of the array, type in this symbol that I've forgotten the name of, and then you type in int. Save that, and now it's an array of integers. Obviously, you can also change that to string, which will cause an error because we don't have strings. So we can just type in something like that, and that's an array of strings. So this is how we can create an array. You just use square brackets, and then you put values in between them, separated by commas. Once you have this array, you can then access any of the values by indexing them. So for example, I'm going to create another variable, but I'm going to store the result of something from collection, but I'm going to index it using the square brackets again and get 0 from it. And if I trace that, it prints out A. A is the first element in the array. We could do the same thing with 1. And then it says B. And as you probably guessed, if you put in 2 here, it'll print out C. So you can get values from an array using an index or a number. These numbers start at 0 and go up to the end of the array. In this case, the end of the array is 2. What happens if you put 3 in here? We end up with null. And that's because we don't have anything in that third section. You would have to add something else there. And now we have D. So arrays can be ordered from 0 up to the end of the array. Technically speaking, they go from 0 up to the length of the array minus 1. And speaking of length, you can actually get the length of the array. So I'm going to take the collection array here, add that in, and then type in dot length. You won't have seen this dot before, but that will become very important next video. I'll explain it more there. And as you might guess, it prints out 4 because the array has 4 values in it. Now, what if you want to add something to the array? You can do that in a couple of ways. You can do that by simply typing collection and then indexing a value. So I'm going to say 1. In this case, there will be the B here. And then I can assign a new value to that. So I'll type in Z. And if I print out collection at the index of 1, you will get that instead of B. You can print out entire arrays, so you can just trace the collection, and it will helpfully print out the entire array for you. In this case, we've got A, Z, C, D in order, and no B because we replaced it. Another very helpful way of adding things to a collection is by adding them onto the end of the collection. So I'm going to type in collection.push. Again, don't worry about the weird symbols here. We'll explain that next video. I'm just going to push X. And now if we print the entire collection, you get A, B, C, D, X. Push basically pushes this value onto the end of the array. So all this is really cool. But where arrays really shine is when they're used in combination with loops. The two types of loops we'll cover in this video are for loops and while loops. To create a for loop, we'll type in for, open some brackets. I'm going to type in letter, because we're trying to get letters from this array here, in collection, and then add a brace like you would with an if statement. And now I'm going to trace letter. And you'll see it prints A, B, C, and D, but not all at the same time. It prints one at a time. So when you run through this code, you get to the for loop, and then it will start looping over this array. So it will start at the first letter in the array, which is A, and then run this code. In this case, we're just printing A to the screen. And then it continues to the next value in the array, which is B. So it prints out B. And then it loops over to the next one, and so on, until you get to the end of the array, and then finishes. This does not have to be called letter, by the way. This can be anything that you want. You are just giving a name to the values in the array. It helps to name this something useful so that you know what your code's doing. When using for loops, you don't always have to loop over arrays. You can also loop over something called a range. So basically, I'm just going to type in 0, and then 3 dots, and then 10. I'll give this a more useful name. And it just loops over every number in that range, like that. It goes from 0 up to 9. So this will go from 0 up to 10, but not including 10. So it goes from 0 to 9. That's just another way of using for loops. This can be very useful if you want an array index, because you can also add, for example, collection.length. That's a number, so that works there. So it runs through the loop 4 times, because 4 is the length of the array. It goes from 0 up to 4, but not including 4. So it goes from 0 to 3. And just to prove that you can use this as an index, collection num. And we'll trace that. And we ended up with the same result as before. As you can see, for loops can get very flexible, and you'll see these get used a lot for that reason. They are a very, very useful feature of any programming language. Now I want to talk about another type of loop, which is the while loop. To demonstrate while loops, we're going to set the number variable to 0, and then we're going to create a while loop. So while, in brackets, number is less than 10. It's pretty much the same as a for loop, except we're putting a condition in these brackets. And then in here, I'm going to number plus equals 2, and then trace number. In the console, you see 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 in that order. So what's happening with the while loop is, once it gets to the while loop, it checks to see if number is less than 10. If that's true, run the code. And after this code finishes, it'll go back to the while loop and check again. Is number less than 10? It might still be true. If it's true, run again. And then it just keeps on going through this loop until it's false, and then it will leave the loop. But yes, this also means, don't do this by the way, you can also do while true. This means you will be in a loop forever. And when this happens, your program will simply freeze. It will just not do anything. If you do end up following along for whatever reason, on a Mac you can right click and force quit. In Windows you can go to the task manager and force quit there. But yes, consider that a warning. While loops can be endless, they can be infinite, so be careful what you're doing with these conditions. Okay, that is everything. So, challenge time. I'm going to type out the challenge here. Let's see. And there we go. So your challenge for this video is to write a loop that copies every value from array into empty. So after this loop that you write, trace empty should print out the same thing that array prints out here. So just to point that out, I'm going to trace ARR. It prints out this little array that says hello in it. I want you to print out empty, and empty should contain these values. So I want you to write a loop that copies all the values from ARR into empty. This will only take 2 to 3 lines of code, so don't overthink it. I've given you all the tools that you need, so if you need to, rewatch the video to figure it out. But as always, the solution will be in the comments if you are completely stuck. So there's your challenge. I hope to see you in the next video.